I think that true philanthropy comes from the heart of yourself. And growing up as a poor girl, I mean really poor, not just not having wonderful economic circumstances or material things, but literally poor, like no running water kind of poor. And having education being the road to freedom for me. My grandmother only finished 3rd grade, but taught me to read the Bible, so I grew up knowing how to read and put myself in the position of, by the time I got to kindergarten, I knew all the biblical names from the Christian Bible. So I had a central moment growing up with my mother in Milwaukee after leaving Mississippi. My mother had said there would be no Christmas that year, and therefore there would be no Santa Claus. And I remember being embarrassed about having to go to school, because we all know that the Christmas, the holidays, is about going to school and saying what you got, and I got this. And so I was embarrassed about what I would tell, what would my story be. I wasn't so worried about not getting anything. I was worried about what the story was going to be for what I did or did not get. About midnight that night, Christmas Eve, some nuns showed up at our door. 3 nuns carrying baskets of food and toys for my half-sister and brother and myself. And I remember feeling relief. I felt not joy, but relief. And a sense of wonder that somebody who didn't know me would be able to figure out where we lived and come to our house with a turkey and food for Christmas, and managed to bring a Tammy doll for me, although I'd been wishing for Barbie. I never forgot that moment. And years later, when I was contemplating how I wanted to use my own resources, I thought about those nuns. So my first venture was to go to South Africa and to be able to do for other children, to create that experience that I'd felt for myself, that sense of wonder that somebody cared about me who didn't even know my name. Because I know that for me, it was more than the toys, it was more than the food, it was that somebody reached out and literally the energy of them touched the heart of me. So I wanted to do that. I also knew what a big role education had played in my life. And I always knew from the beginning of my success that I would have to find a way to give back. That's just a part of the way my grandmother raised me, that to those who much is given, much is expected. She never lived to see how much was given, but I was, taught to give back. So I started out and made a lot of mistakes, because I think all of us go through the process of figuring out the difference between charity and true philanthropy. I made a lot of mistakes because I wanted to give. The heart of me knew that I wanted to have other people experience some of what I had experienced, but I wasn't quite sure of how to do it. So I made a lot of mistakes based on emotional giving.
Now when you look at opportunities, what's the lens you use to identify where and how you want to give, whatever the resource is?
Well, people refer to me as a brand now, the Oprah brand. I never knew what a brand was when I first started out. I didn't even know what that was. I became a brand by making every decision flow from the truth of myself. Every choice I made for every show that was going to be on the air, I made based upon, does this feel right? Does this feel right? Does this feel right? And I do the same thing in terms of my philanthropic efforts. It's where do I feel that I can have the most impact or do the most good. I had the great benefit of when we had done Christmas Kindness, which was truly an emotional decision. I want to go to South Africa. I want to go to South Africa and I want to do for all of these kids what someone had done for me. I ended up being invited by Nelson Mandela to stay at his home for 10 days. And I was at first very intimidated because I'd said to my partner, Stedman, oh my God, what are we gonna talk about? I don't know what I'm gonna talk about. For 10 days and 10 nights in Nelson Mandela's house. And Stedman said, why don't you try listening? And, oh, that's a marvelous idea. So when we were talking one day in a conversation and we got to the point where we were comfortable enough to sit in silence, that's how you know you made it. You can be in a room and don't have to say anything. We were just in the room reading the newspaper and started a conversation about what was in the paper, poverty and how to change it. And I said, the only way to change poverty is through education. And one day I would like to build a school in South Africa. And he said, you want to build a school? Got up, called the Minister of Education, and by that afternoon I was in a meeting talking about building a school. So the school for me was the way in, because I knew that education, taking a child out of their village, creating an environment for them where they have aspiration and can feel the spirit of themselves. And what I know is true is that true spirituality, the real spirit of every human being, is that part of ourselves which is drawn to hope, And every one of us has that thing inside of us, that spirit that is drawn to hope. And that's what I wanted to do, was to create an environment where girls, and I chose girls because I am one, have been one, understand that, don't know nothing about boys. And I wanted them to feel the strength and power of hopefulness, that you can do and be and fulfill the possibility of your creation. So that's why I do what I do. I know you're going to ask about the crisis at the school. Devastating to me when, after setting up this school, there was one of the dorm parents was involved in sexual abuse. She was later acquitted, but I still believe the girls. First of all, never in all of my wildest imaginations in preparing for the school, we thought of everything, including knowing how devastating the crime situation can be in South Africa, electrifying all the fences around the borders and making sure that men were off the campus by a certain time at night. Never occurred to me or anyone, I think, that you would have abuse or charges of abuse from a female on campus. And so when that happened, there were lots of people who said, oh my goodness, okay, does this, destroy the dream? No, because I held on to what is the greater vision of that. What it taught me is that what everybody else in this room has had to learn or will learn, that the real key is not making emotional decisions, as I did with, I want to build a school, I want to help girls like myself, but starting with the infrastructure and the leadership that can sustain it long term. I think that's where the biggest mistakes have been made, particularly in Africa, is people have really hopeful ideas and they have really, altruistic visions, but if you don't create the system and put in the infrastructure and have the leadership, and in many cases you have to, as you know, Melinda, you have to train the people first in order to even begin to create the infrastructure. So we all go in with our big ideas and our great ideas, but if the platform hasn't been laid for long-term sustainability, and particularly, I would say, biggest mistake is leadership. You have to have people whose vision is not only aligned with yours, but they also carry the passion for the vision as you do. Not just, oh, I want to execute, or I just want to, work in this. You need people who are equally as passionate about it as you are. And when you can do that, then you at least have a chance.
I was very struck by a quote from you. You said, the greatest thing about what I do is that I'm in a position to change lives. It's the most incredible platform for influence that you could imagine. What's that experience like?
Well, I would say this. I think everyone in this room has experienced it to some degree. Because what I learned over the years in my 35,000 interviews with people, and still counting, is that there's a common denominator in the human experience. That whether I was talking to a convict, I interviewed a father in prison who'd murdered his 2 daughters. I interviewed a group of women in Texas who'd all murdered their children. I've talked to victims of abuse. I've talked to people who've been through traumatic circumstances in their life, people who've had great victories in their life. I've talked to almost every celebrity you could imagine. And at the end of every single one of those interviews, in one form or another, each of them said this: was I okay? Was that okay? I finished interviewing 5 men who all admitted to being child molesters and told in graphic detail how they lured children and seduced children. And it was really pretty profound, I would say, compelling. At the end of it, they said, was that okay? At the end of Beyonce dancing on stage in all of her Beyonce-ness, she turned to me and said, was that okay? So what I learned in all of those thousands of interviews is that there is a common denominator in our human experience. And when I go into any interview, no matter how intimidated I might be or how, oh my gosh, I've never talked to this person before, I know that that's the line of truth that's running through. Everybody wants to know, did you hear me? And did what I say matter? And that's in your own personal relationships, that's with your children, that's every argument you've ever had is really about, are you hearing me? I'm sure somebody's actually said those words in this room. You don't hear me, are you hearing me? So fundamentally, the desire to be heard, the desire to be validated, the desire to know that what you're doing is meaningful in the world is something that we all hold for ourselves. Just this past week, on my network-owned, I do something called Super Soul Sunday, and I was interviewing Carolyn Mace, who wrote a book called Anatomy of Spirit. And what's really exciting for me is that we were able to broadcast that not just on the cable platform, but to also blast it around the world. So we simulcast it around the world. So all around the world, people are tweeting in, thousands of people at the same time. And she said something that really hit a nerve. I knew it would hit a nerve with everybody because it hit a nerve with me. She was talking about how most people lead their lives following a course that is not their own. And that unless you can find the course that is truly your own, you will remain off course. And she was talking about how so many women betray themselves, and that when you betray yourself in relationships, regardless of what those relationships are, that you are no different than the person who hurt you. Now, that's just a simple little sentence. When you betray yourself, you're no different than the person who hurt you. Most of us in this room are cognizant of that. We're aware of that. But there's a whole world of people who are not. So what comes back to me is all these people who are tweeting, oh my God, I never thought of it that way before. That to me is the purest validation, because the reason why I wanted to do that show is so that people would feel and be able to discover a path to better themselves, a way to see themselves differently. And that one little phrase, when you betray yourself, you become no different than the people who hurt you. Open the door for that. So I, in that way, am validated because I'm very clear about what my purpose on earth is. I'm very clear that the work that I do on television is just a way of me manifesting myself as a vessel and a vehicle for the larger energy that I call God, for the larger universal purpose that I call God.